Betrayal's bitter harvest. 13 years. 13 long years I poured my very essence into her father's company. My time, my energy, my every waking thought, my undivided loyalty. Weekends blurred into weekdays. Vacations were a forgotten luxury. Sleep a distant memory. All sacrificed to transform a struggling venture into an $85 million empire. This wasn't just a business. It was my creation, forged with my own hands. I sculpted it from nothing, resurrecting doomed projects into strategic triumphs, closing deals others deemed impossible, elevating my father-in-law's name until it became synonymous with power and prestige. Yet that evening, seated at the sprawling dining table, surrounded by a family oblivious to the tempest raging beneath my calm exterior, I heard the words that shattered everything. "Your wife's husband will now take over the business." The voice, chillingly devoid of emotion, was my wife's. Her tone was flat, rehearsed, as if she'd practiced this very pronouncement. Her father, a patriarch enthroned at the head of the table, merely offered an approving smile as if this were just another business decision, another shift in power I was expected to accept without question. My grip tightened on my silverware, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. I refused to grant them the perverse satisfaction of witnessing my fury, my profound betrayal. Betrayal by the very man I had dedicated my life to, only to be cast aside like an employee whose contract had expired. My gaze swept across the table. The other family members chattered, ate, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred, or perhaps they knew and simply chose silence, unwilling to challenge the patriarch's decree. It had always been this way. His word was law, and I was a fool. A fool who believed loyalty mattered. A fool who thought years of relentless effort and sacrifice would render me indispensable. A fool who assumed my wife, the woman with whom I had built a life, saw me as a partner, not merely a temporary placeholder. Her new husband. I truly looked at her then, and something clicked, something I should have recognized long ago. She had never fought for me, never stood up for me, never once challenged her father's authority, even when his choices were undeniably unjust. She simply played the part of the dutiful daughter, a princess awaiting her father to broker the most advantageous deal. And now she was being promised to another man, not because I had failed her, not because I was lacking, but because I was simply no longer needed. I meticulously placed my fork down, smoothing my napkin on my lap, maintaining the mask of control that had served me so well in countless business negotiations. I would not react. Not here, not now. They expected anger. They expected resistance. They expected me to protest like a man who hadn't seen the game they were playing. But now I saw it all. The room filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation. Yet, for me, everything had gone silent. I had built an empire for them, and they believed they could simply hand it over to another while I quietly faded away. The night of reckoning. That night, sleep was a stranger. I sat in the dim glow of my study, staring at the neatly stacked documents on my desk. Financial reports, contracts, agreements, all tangible proof of what I had poured into this company, this family. They had underestimated me. They believed I was merely a workhorse, a simpleton who had amassed their fortune while they held the reins. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. The horse they had ridden for 13 years had learned to run without a rider, and if they believed I would simply walk away from everything I had built, they were profoundly mistaken. By 3 o'clock in the morning, I was alone in my home office. The laptop screen illuminated the grim determination etched on my face. There was no room for slumber in my mind tonight. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I meticulously reviewed every document, every contract, every financial statement I had ever signed. The betrayal of that evening still echoed in my ears, a haunting refrain. "Your wife's husband will now take over the business." Those words were meant to break me. They were meant to shatter my resolve. Instead, they ignited something far more potent, an unyielding fire to reclaim what was mine. For 13 years, I had been methodical, while my father-in-law played the role of the respectable businessman, and my wife lived a life of opulent ease. I had been making my moves, subtle, quiet, yet undeniably strategic. I was no fool. I had witnessed how power shifted in this family, how loyalty was never a guarantee, how the only person I could truly trust was myself. And so I had ensured that my control over the company was not merely symbolic, it was legal, it was ironclad, and it was absolute. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I opened the executive shareholder agreement. The numbers stared back at me, a stark reminder of what I had orchestrated over the years. 62%. That was how much of the company belonged to me, not my father-in-law, not my wife, not the stranger they had chosen to replace me, to me. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. They thought they had cornered me, but they had no idea I had already built my escape route. They expected me to quietly vanish. Instead, I was about to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. The dawn of retribution. As the clock struck 8:45 in the morning, I walked into the company headquarters not as a man discarded, but as a man about to burn their meticulously laid plans to ash. The lobby was already a hive of activity, employees, executives, and assistants moving between meetings. Some nodded to me with deference, others regarded me with uncertainty. The whispers had already begun. Has he heard the news? Is he resigning? What's he going to do? I ignored them. I wasn't there for gossip. I was there for war. Taking the elevator to the top floor, I entered my office. My mere presence sent a ripple of tension through the space. My assistant Danielle looked up from her desk, her face betraying none of the chaos that must have been circulating through the corporate grapevine. She had been with me for nearly 10 years, loyal, perceptive, and always 2 steps ahead. Schedule a board meeting for noon, I said, setting my briefcase down. She hesitated for only a second before nodding. Anything else? Yes, I said, my voice calm. Call the legal team. I want them ready. A flicker of understanding passed through her eyes. The battle had begun. By the time I settled into my chair, I was already anticipating their next move. My father-in-law would waste no time. He would pull his strings, coerce the executives to accept the transition, present it as a necessary changing of the guard. He would use my wife's name to solidify his argument. After all, who would question a man handing over his business to his daughter and her new husband? The problem was, I wasn't just a name on a piece of paper. I was the name on the contracts that mattered. The eruption of truth. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, as if on cue, my office door burst open without a knock. My father-in-law entered first, his presence as imposing as ever, followed by my wife, her posture as graceful as if this were nothing more than another casual meeting. And then he entered, the so-called new husband. Tall, young, confident, precisely the kind of man my father-in-law would deem worthy of taking my place. He exuded an air of arrogance, a smug grin that stemmed from the conviction that he had already won. I almost laughed. I assume you're aware of the transition? My father-in-law said, his voice carrying the weight of expectation. I leaned back in my chair, fingers laced together. The transition, an interesting choice of words. The man beside my wife chuckled, as if he found this amusing. I ignored him. He was nothing more than a pawn in someone else's game. My focus was on the real threat, the man who had orchestrated this betrayal. We need you to oversee the handover, my father-in-law continued. We expect full cooperation. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. They truly believed they had thought of everything. You don't have the authority to make that decision, I said, my voice eerily calm. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. My wife's expression barely shifted, but the smug grin on her new husband's face wavered. I reached for a remote on my desk and pressed a button. Behind me, the massive wall screen lit up, displaying the executive shareholder agreement. Their eyes darted across the document. Confusion bloomed first, then panic. This document states that any transfer of power requires the approval of the majority shareholder, I said, watching as the reality of the situation dawned on them. And that would be me. Silence, heavy, unmistakable. For the first time, my father-in-law's mask of composure cracked. That's impossible, he muttered. No, I corrected. my voice cutting through the tension. What's impossible is thinking I'd spend 13 years building something only for you to steal it from me. I turned to my wife. Did you truly believe I wouldn't have foreseen this? I asked her, my voice laced with disappointment. She didn't respond, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I let the silence stretch between us before shifting my attention to the man standing next to her, the one who had walked in thinking he was about to inherit an empire. You have two options, I told him. You can work under me, or you can walk out that door and never step foot in this company again. His face flushed, his jaw clenched. He looked at my wife, then at my father-in-law. He had expected a triumphant procession, not a public humiliation. He stormed out without a word. My father-in-law hesitated for a fraction of a second before following him. My wife lingered for another moment. She met my gaze, searching for something. Anger, regret, weakness. She found nothing. I had built this empire for years, and if they thought they could take it from me, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. After the battle, the air in my office crackled with the residual tension that lingered long after my father-in-law and my so-called replacement had stormed out. My wife still stood there, her hands clenched at her sides, her carefully curated mask of indifference slightly askew. She wasn't used to losing, and neither was her father. But today they had lost. I leaned back in my chair, watching her intently. She waited for me to break the silence, to give her something, an explanation, an argument, a reaction. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. You knew, she finally said, her voice quiet but with a sharp edge. You knew all along. I tilted my head slightly as if considering her words. Knew exactly what? Her nostrils flared. Don't play the fool. You knew what my father was planning. You knew he was going to hand the company over to... She trailed off before speaking his name. She didn't need to. I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers on the desk. Of course I knew, I said smoothly. I know how your father operates. He's predictable. He thinks power is something he can shuffle like a deck of cards. He underestimated me, just as you did. Her lips tightened into a thin line. It doesn't have to be a war, you know. I laughed, the sound dry and humorless. It already is, my dear. Her gaze flickered to the massive screen behind me, still displaying the shareholder agreement, the document that had just annihilated all their carefully laid plans. I saw the dawning realization in her eyes, the understanding that the life she had expected, the seamless transition she had envisioned, had just gone up in flames. So what now? She asked. You think you can just keep me out? That my father will accept this? I rose slowly, deliberately, and walked around the desk. She tensed slightly as I stopped directly in front of her. Let's be clear about something, I said in a low voice. Your father no longer runs this company. I do. If you want to stay in this game, you'll do so on my terms. She scoffed. You don't control me. I smiled. No, but I control what matters. And right now, that's the future of this company. If you thought I was just going to step aside and let you and your new husband walk in, you don't know me as well as you think. Her jaw tightened. She had always been adept at masking her emotions, but I knew her too well. She was panicking. This isn't over, she whispered, her voice carrying more desperation than defiance. Oh, I know, I said. This is just the beginning. She turned abruptly and walked out, the door slamming shut behind her. I exhaled, my shoulders slumping. The first battle was won, but the war was far from over. I had outmaneuvered them, but I knew my father-in-law well enough to understand that he wasn't one to accept defeat easily. He had built his reputation over decades, surrounding himself with people who feared him, admired him, obeyed him. I was about to become the one thing he had never accounted for, his equal. Or, even worse for him, his superior. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Danielle, call a board meeting for noon. Understood, she replied instantly. I needed to solidify my position before my father-in-law could attempt to rally the board against me. Money and influence could turn people disloyal in a heartbeat, and I wasn't naive enough to believe I had no enemies among the executives. I walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. I had spent over 10 years building this empire, and for what? To be discarded, replaced, humiliated? No, not a chance. The climax in a new era. By noon, the boardroom was filled with executives. Some looked anxious, others neutral, and a few were clearly waiting to see how the situation unfolded before choosing a side. I took my seat at the head of the table. "I've called this meeting for one reason," I began, my voice level, "to discuss the future of this company." A few board members exchanged glances. My father-in-law leaned forward, his fingers interlaced. "The future is already decided," he said smoothly. "The question is whether you will accept it or fight it." I smiled, tilting my head slightly. "Oh, I'm not fighting it. I'm shaping it." I reached for a folder in front of me, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and slid them across the table. "These are the company's financial reports," I announced, watching as the executives leaned in. "Specifically, reports of misappropriated funds, hidden debts, and unauthorized transactions." The reaction was immediate. Whispers rippled through the room, glances darting toward my father-in-law. "This is nonsense," he blustered. "Is it?" I challenged, flipping a page and turning the document toward him. "Because this right here is a record of $14 million transferred to offshore accounts in your name." Silence descended upon the room. One of the board members, a man who had always been one of my father-in-law's closest allies, cleared his throat. "Is this true?" My father-in-law's expression barely changed, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. He was cornered, and he knew it. "This is a private family matter," he said, his voice softer now. "No," I corrected, my tone sharp. "This is a corporate matter, and as the majority shareholder, it's my duty to protect this company from corruption." More whispers. The tide was turning. I leaned forward, driving my point home. "You wanted to take everything from me. Instead, you just gave me everything I needed to destroy you." A long pause, then finally my father-in-law exhaled slowly, his gaze meeting mine. For the first time in his life, he looked truly defeated. "What do you want?" he asked. "Your resignation," I said without hesitation. "Effective immediately." More silence. Then, to my astonishment, he nodded. "Fine." A quiet gasp from one of the board members. Even my wife, my former wife, looked stunned. "And the shares," I added, "transfer them to me." My father-in-law's jaw tightened. "You're pushing." "No," I said simply. "I'm ending this." A long pause. Then finally he sighed, pushing the documents back toward me. "You truly are ruthless," he muttered. I scoffed. I learned from the best. And just like that, it was over. My father-in-law left the company that day. My wife didn't follow him, not immediately. She lingered, watching me, but I didn't spare her a second glance. I had won, and nothing would ever be the same. The dawn of a new empire. By the next morning, the entire city knew what had transpired. The headlines blaring across the business news outlets were as brutal as they were satisfying. Corporate coup, end of an era at Hastings Enterprises. Chairman resigns amid financial misconduct allegations. Hastings empire crumbles. The rise of its true architect. I sat in my office, sipping my morning coffee, reading each article with quiet satisfaction. The war was over. The battlefield was mine. My father-in-law had been forced to resign, stripped of the company he once commanded. His shares, once the symbol of his iron grip, were now in my name, and best of all, he hadn't even tried to fight it, because he knew he had lost. Danielle walked in without knocking, holding a tablet. "You're all over the front pages. Some are calling you a genius, others are calling you ruthless." I smirked. "Both are accurate." She set the tablet down and gave me a knowing look. "There's something you should know. Your ex-wife has been calling nonstop." I didn't react. I had expected it. "Let her call." Danielle hesitated. "She also tried to come into the building earlier. Security turned her away." I exhaled slowly. She's clearly not used to being ignored. "Clearly," Danielle murmured before shaking her head. "One more thing. You're getting interview requests. Bloomberg, Forbes, even a few international networks, everyone wants a comment. I scoffed. They want to know how I managed to dismantle a legacy in less than a week. Something like that. I leaned back in my chair, considering. The truth was, I wasn't interested in feeding the media frenzy. Let them speculate. Let them build their narratives of power, betrayal, and corporate warfare. The only thing that mattered was control. I declined everything. Danielle, I said, I've declined all offers and turned them all away. Danielle raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She knew me well enough to understand that I wasn't seeking public validation. My schedule for today? I asked. You have your meeting with the new board at 2 o'clock, she replied. They're eager to hear what direction you want to take the company now that it's entirely yours. I nodded. Good. Make sure all financial reports are on my desk by then. I want to walk in there with every number at my fingertips. Danielle turned to leave but paused at the door. And your ex-wife? I didn't look up from my coffee. She made her choices. Let her live with them. Danielle nodded and left. For a moment, I allowed myself to lean back and close my eyes. The past few days had been a war, but I had emerged exactly where I needed to be, on top, and I wasn't about to let anyone drag me down again. By noon, I had another call from her. I ignored it. By 12:30, a text message arrived. We need to talk. I scoffed at the simplicity of the words, as if a few words could undo everything. By 1 o'clock, she sent another. Please. That made me pause. Not because I felt anything for her. No, that part of me had been erased the moment she sat at that dinner table and allowed her father to dictate my replacement. No, I paused because I recognized desperation when I saw it, and desperate people are unpredictable. By 1:45, I arrived in the boardroom. The executives were already seated, their postures stiff, their eyes wary. They had spent years under my father-in-law's rule, accustomed to following his lead. Now they looked at me, unsure what to expect. I let the silence stretch as I took my place at the head of the table. Let's not waste any time, I said, lacing my fingers together. I know there are concerns. I know some of you were aligned with my predecessor. But let me be clear. This company doesn't run on loyalty to a name. It runs on results. A few of them shifted in their seats. We're not going to spend time mourning the past, I continued. We're going to move forward, and those who are willing to do so will be rewarded. The tension in the room eased slightly. These were men of business. They didn't care about sentiment. They cared about profit. And if I could bring them more money than my father-in-law ever had, they would come around. I spent the next hour outlining my strategy, expanding global operations, restructuring inefficient departments, forging new international partnerships. By the time the meeting concluded, the board was no longer hesitant. They were intrigued, and I had them exactly where I wanted them. A meeting at twilight. That night, as I exited the office, I saw her. She was waiting in the lobby, standing near the entrance in a fitted gray dress, looking as impeccable as always. I could have walked past her. I could have ignored her completely. But a part of me wanted to hear what she would say, if only to observe her attempts to find an explanation. So I stopped. She looked up, relief flickering across her face. You finally decided to see me. No, I said simply. Just chose not to pretend you don't exist. She flinched slightly but quickly regained her composure. Can we talk alone? I studied her for a long moment, then without a word turned and walked toward the side exit. I knew she would follow. Outside, the night air was crisp, the city lights reflecting off the glass windows of the building that I now fully controlled. She wrapped her arms around herself, hesitant. I didn't want this, she finally said. I laughed, shaking my head. You stood by and watched it happen. She stopped, frustration flickering in her eyes. I didn't know how to stop it. You didn't try, I said coldly. Silence hung between us. I made a mistake, she finally admitted. I nodded, my hands in my pockets. Yes, you did. Her lips parted slightly as if she expected a different answer. She exhaled. I just want to know if there's a way to fix this. I looked at her, truly looked. She was the woman I had once trusted, once believed in, and now she was just another person who had underestimated me. No, I said, my voice flat. You can't fix this. You can't rewrite the ending. Her eyes flashed with something, anger, regret, perhaps even grief, but none of it mattered. I turned and walked away because some things were beyond salvage, and she had made her choice. As I walked away from her, I didn't look back. There was no need. Whatever desperation she felt now, whatever regret had finally seeped into her heart, it was too late. She had watched as I was cast aside like a discarded thing, stood silently while her father tried to erase me from my own empire, and now she wanted to fix things. There was nothing to fix. I got into my car, exhaling slowly, my grip tight on the steering wheel. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I already knew who it was before I glanced at the screen. Another message from her. Please, just one conversation. I didn't reply. Instead, I silenced the notifications and pulled out of the parking lot. There was work to be done, a company to run, a future to secure. The past could keep calling, keep begging, but I was done answering. By the time I arrived home, my body was exhausted, but my mind remained sharp. I poured myself a drink, stepping out onto the balcony of my penthouse. The city sprawled before me, alive and endless, shimmering under the night sky. I had reclaimed everything they had tried to take from me and more. The company was mine, wholly mine. And for the first time in years, I answered to no one. Not to a father-in-law dictating my future, nor to a wife standing in the shadows, complicit in my downfall. So why did I feel this quiet, lingering anticipation? Because I knew the game wasn't over. People like my father-in-law didn't just fade away. They regrouped, they retaliated, and I was ready for it. Checkmate. The following morning, I returned to my office before the sun had fully breached the horizon. Danielle was already there, as always, her efficiency unmatched. She placed a folder on my desk before I even had a chance to sit down. You were right, she stated simply. I opened the folder, my gaze sweeping across its contents. A clandestine meeting had taken place last night. My father-in-law, a few of his ancient allies, a handful of investors who had long profited from his reign. They're seeking a path back, Danielle continued, her voice low, attempting to rally support, to brand you as reckless, unstable. I scoffed, pushing the folder aside. They're desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things. She wasn't wrong. Do we have leverage on any of the investors? I asked, already knowing the answer. Danielle nodded, flipping to a fresh page in the folder. 3 of them have questionable financial histories, offshore accounts, undeclared income, some dubious dealings skirting the very edge of the law. If they push too hard, we can squeeze them. And the rest? 2 of them are merely waiting to see who emerges victorious. They don't care who runs the company as long as their money keeps multiplying. Then we'll ensure they know where the true power resides. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of the most influential investor on that list. A man who had built his fortune on the backs of others, who had never truly cared for loyalty, only for profit. He answered on the second ring. I was expecting your call. Then you already know why I'm calling, I stated evenly. He chuckled. Your father-in-law was very persuasive. He believes you're too aggressive, too impulsive. He argues the company would fare better under someone more moderate. And what do you think? I countered. A pause, then. I think I like making money, and right now you're the one making it. I smiled. Glad we understand each other. He chuckled again. For now, but power shifts quickly in this world. Be careful, son. I am always careful. I hung up the phone and turned to Danielle. One secured. Now we deal with the rest. By midday, I had secured the allegiance of the majority of the key investors. They remained with me, at least for now. This left my father-in-law with fewer allies, fewer options, and fewer chances of a return. At precisely 3 o'clock that afternoon, my office phone rang. I answered without hesitation. I wondered when you would call. You're making a mistake, my father-in-law's voice resonated, calm yet resolute. You keep saying that, yet I am still here, and you are not. A pause, then. This isn't over. I smirked, leaning back in my chair. It is for you. Silence. Enjoy your retirement, I said, then hung up. I exhaled, placing the phone down. The game was over. That night, returning home, I found yet another message from her. I miss you. I stared at the words for a long moment, then deleted the message without a reply. She had chosen her side, and I had won. I stepped onto the balcony, the city sprawling before me. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I was meant to be, untouchable, unstoppable, and finally, free. New horizons and the final battle. By the following morning, the dust had settled, but the game had not ended. The struggle for power never truly ceased. It merely shifted, taking on new forms, new challenges. The difference now was that the sword was in my hand. I arrived at the office before sunrise, the city still stirring awake as I entered the towering glass edifice that bore my legacy. Employees moved through the corridors, whispering, casting furtive glances my way. They weren't accustomed to this version of me, the man who had once quietly worked in the background, now the man who commanded everything. Danielle awaited me in my office, already engrossed in her tablet. She barely glanced up as she spoke. Your ex-wife was seen leaving her father's house last night. Sources say she's distancing herself from him. I scoffed. Distancing herself, of course. She sees the way the tide is turning. Danielle finally looked up, her gaze sharp. Do you think she's doing it for you? I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. No, she's doing it for herself, because that's how she's always been. She spent years aligning herself with power, ensuring she was always on the winning side. Now that her father has been dethroned, she's seeking a way to reclaim her standing. What do you want to do about it? Danielle inquired. I leaned back, considering. Nothing. Let her flail. Let her wonder if I'll let her back in. Let her feel what I felt the moment she betrayed me. Danielle nodded, offering no argument. She knew better than anyone that I operated not from emotion but from strategy. What else? I asked, shifting my focus back to business. The rest of the board is on your side, at least for now. The investors who wavered have backed down. But there's one more concern. I raised an eyebrow. And that is... She placed a document on my desk. Your father-in-law still holds influence. He may not have ownership, but he has connections. If he wants to cause trouble for you, he can. I glanced at the document. It detailed his remaining assets, his political ties, his ability to manipulate certain markets. He's not finished fighting, I murmured. Agreed, Danielle said. He's just waiting for an opening. I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers on the desk. Then I won't give him one. Schedule a meeting with the board. I want everything airtight before he makes his next move. Already working on it, she said, exiting the office. I swiveled my chair to the window, gazing at the city. This was the part no one ever talked about. What happened after victory? People assumed winning was the end, but it never was. Power had to be maintained, defended, solidified, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me again. By midday, the boardroom was packed. The atmosphere was different now. No uncertainty, no divided loyalties. They all knew where the power resided. We're going to discuss expansion, I announced, surveying the room. Hastings Enterprises is no longer solely a domestic firm. We're taking it global. A few surprised looks, some nods, already calculating the implications. We've relied on old strategies for too long, I continued. We've been reactive. Now we will be proactive. New markets, new investments. We don't sit back and wait for opportunities. We create them. One of the executives shifted in his seat. That will require aggressive financing. I smiled. I'm aware. Danielle placed another document on the table. We've already begun sourcing private equity. Within the next 3 months, we'll have the liquidity needed to make our first international acquisition. Murmurs of approval. My father-in-law had treated this company like his personal kingdom for years, using it to consolidate power rather than to actually grow. That was his greatest mistake. He played defense. I wasn't going to. I was going to conquer. That night, as I exited the office, my phone rang, an unknown number. I already knew who it was. I answered, bringing the phone to my ear without speaking a word, a slow exhale on the other end. "You've made your point," I scoffed. "Have I?" A pause, then, "Do you think you've won? Do you think this is over?" "It is over," I said, sliding into my car. "You just don't want to accept it. You're playing a dangerous game, son." "I'm not playing anymore. You are. And you lost." Silence. "Retire," I continued. "Enjoy what's left of your influence before it completely evaporates. Because if you come for me again, I won't just take your company. I'll take your legacy." A long pause, then finally, "You truly are ruthless." "You taught me well," I said before hanging up. I set the phone aside, exhaling. That was the last time my father-in-law would try to challenge me. 3 months later, Hastings Enterprises finalized its first international acquisition, breaching the European markets. The numbers soared. I watched from my office window as the stock price climbed, the city lights reflecting in the glass. I had won, not just a battle, but the war, and no one would ever take it from me again. That night, I received another message from her. "I still love you." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a single reply. "I don't." And after that, I blocked her number. Because power isn't just about winning. It's about knowing when to walk away, and I never looked back. The unfinished symphony. The city never truly slept, and neither did power. While the rest of the world navigated its routines, I was several moves ahead, calculating my next stroke. Power was not only about retention, but expansion. And if my father-in-law had spent decades defending his empire, I was going to spend the next decade building mine, far grander than he could ever have imagined. The next morning, the office was quieter than usual, my footsteps echoing down the executive hallway. Hastings Enterprises had already begun its global expansion, and the first phase of international acquisitions was complete. But there was still much work to be done. Danielle waited for me, as always, a fresh folder in her hands. "The numbers from our latest acquisition," she said, extending it. I opened it, scanning the reports. The company we had just acquired was already proving to be a gold mine. Revenue had surged by 17% in the first quarter, with even higher projections for the next fiscal year. "This is good," I said, nodding. "It's more than good," she corrected. "It's a statement. The market knows you're not just holding ground, you're growing." That was precisely the point. My father-in-law had played it safe for years, keeping the company within familiar territory. But power wasn't about safety, it was about dominance. "Any resistance?" I inquired. "Not from the board," she said, "but your ex-wife has been calling." I showed no reaction. "Who?" "Some of the investors, a few of the remaining executives who were loyal to her father." I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers on the desk. "She's looking for a way back in," Danielle continued, trying to leverage whatever influence she has left. "And how are they reacting?" "So far, they're ignoring her. But if she keeps pushing, someone might listen." That was the problem with people like her. They never accepted defeat. She had linked herself to power her entire life, always making sure she was on the winning side. And now, for the first time, she was powerless. "Let her try," I finally said. "It won't change anything." Danielle hesitated. She also showed up at the building again this morning. Security turned her away. I scoffed, shaking my head. "She's desperate." "So be it," I stated simply. Danielle studied me for a moment, then nodded. She didn't have to say it, but I heard the unspoken words in her silence. "It's not over." And perhaps in her mind it wasn't. But for me, it was over the moment she allowed me to be erased. By mid-afternoon, I was on a conference call with a potential partner in Dubai, discussing another major acquisition. We were expanding rapidly, and the world was taking notice. "Your reputation precedes you," the man on the other end said. "The way you handled the power transfer was ruthless." I smiled faintly. Business isn't personal. Oh, but it is, he chuckled. Every move you make tells the world who you are. And right now, the world is watching. I knew it. I welcomed it. By the time the call ended, I had forged yet another partnership, and Hastings Enterprises was one step closer to becoming a global powerhouse. I had built an empire that no one, not my ex-wife, not her father, not their failing schemes, could take from me. And this was just the beginning, the last meeting. That evening, I walked into my penthouse, the city lights stretching infinitely beyond the glass walls, a drink in my hand. My phone vibrated again. Another message from her. I should have ignored it, but something in me wanted to see what she would say. I opened it. I just want to talk one last time. I exhaled, setting my drink down. I owed her nothing, but I wanted to see what her final move would be. So, against my better judgment, I sent a single reply. Tomorrow, noon, my office. The next day, precisely at noon, she walked into my office. She was still as impeccable as ever, still carried herself with the same effortless confidence. But there was something different about her now, a hesitation in her step, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She sat opposite me, crossing her legs carefully. "You look well," she said after a moment. I didn't reply. I simply studied her. She sighed. "I don't know how to start this conversation." "Then don't." Her jaw tightened slightly, but she forced a small smile. "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," I corrected. "And it was the wrong one." "I agree," she conceded. I tilted my head slightly. "It didn't feel wrong when you sat across from me at that dinner table, allowing your father to replace me like an expired employee." She flinched at that. "Good." "I was foolish," she said, her voice softer. "I let my father control everything. I let him make the decisions thinking it was what was best for me. But now I see." She swallowed. "I see I lost the only thing that truly mattered." I leaned back, watching her. "And what was that?" I asked, my voice unreadable. She hesitated. "You." I laughed. I didn't even mean for it to escape. "You didn't lose me," I said, shaking my head. "You threw me away. There's a difference." Her eyes flashed with emotion. "Do you really hate me that much?" I exhaled slowly. "No, I don't hate you. I just don't care." She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched the realization dawn in her eyes. This wasn't a game she could win, not this time. "You wanted to talk," I said, standing up. "Now we have. I have work to do." She rose to her feet, looking as if she wanted to say something more, but in the end she didn't. She simply nodded once, turned, and walked out of my office. And this time, I knew she wouldn't be back. As the door closed behind her, I exhaled. Not because I felt relief, not because I felt anger, but because for the first time in a long time I felt absolutely nothing, and that meant I had truly won. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time since this war began, I felt nothing. No fury, no regret, no satisfaction. Only a cold, quiet finality. It was over. She had walked out of my life the moment she allowed her father to erase me, and today I had repaid the favor. I turned to my desk, my fingers tracing the smooth surface as I exhaled. No more distractions, no more betrayals to unravel, no more battles to wage. I had won. And yet the city outside my office window continued to move, untouched by the war I had fought and won. The world didn't stop for victory, and neither did I. My phone vibrated. Danielle's voice came through the speaker. "Reporters are still requesting interviews. They want your official statement now that everything is settled." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Let them speculate. I owe no explanations to anyone." "Understood," she said. A pause. "By the way, your ex-wife just left the building." "I know." She looked different, not as confident. "She'll get used to it," I stated simply. Danielle didn't push. She never did. She understood me better than most. "One more thing," she said. "Your father-in-law has officially stepped down from all his remaining positions. He's out of all boards, all financial circles. The investors have severed ties. He's irrelevant now. I nodded. Good. That was the last piece, the last loose thread. He had ruled from a desk for decades, controlling people like pieces on a chessboard. He had built a name, a reputation, a legacy, and now he was just another forgotten businessman. Poetic. There's one final matter, Danielle said cautiously. His lawyers contacted us. He's requesting a meeting. I exhaled. Of course he is. He won't give up without trying to salvage something. Some shred of his power, some remnant of his old life. Arrange it, I said. My office tomorrow. Are you sure? I want to see the look on his face when he realizes there's nothing left for him to take. Danielle didn't argue. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., she confirmed. I hung up, staring at the city. Tomorrow I would bury the past once and for all. A legacy that cannot be stolen. The last meeting. Precisely at 10 a.m., the door to my office swung open. My father-in-law entered, but he was not the man he had been months ago. Gone was the confidence, the arrogance, the quiet certainty that he was always in control. He looked old, small, defeated. He sat down without waiting for permission, but there was no power in the gesture. I won't waste time, he said, his voice rougher than before. I know what you think of me. I know you believe this is the end. I didn't reply. I simply watched him. But you misunderstand something, he continued, leaning forward slightly. Power never truly vanishes. It shifts. Today it's yours, but tomorrow it could be someone else's. I smiled faintly. Is that a warning? It's a lesson, he said, one I had to learn the hard way. One day, someone younger, smarter, and hungrier than you will come for what you've built. And if you're not careful, you'll be sitting in that chair having this very conversation. I studied him. He wasn't wrong. Power was never permanent. It had to be protected, strengthened, redefined. But I wasn't him. I hadn't built my empire on familial loyalties or empty favors. I had built it on strategy, control, and absolute advantage. I appreciate the advice, I said evenly, but I am not you, and I won't make your mistakes. He exhaled, shaking his head. We'll see. Silence hung between us. Why are you here? I asked. I want one thing, he finally said. A seat at the table. I laughed, shaking my head. You had a seat. You lost it. I built this company and transformed it into something greater than you ever could. This is no longer your legacy. It's mine. His jaw tightened. Then at least allow me to buy back in, he pressed. Name your price. There is no price. Something flashed in his eyes. Frustration, perhaps even desperation. You're cutting me out completely? You cut yourself out, I stated simply. You made your choice, now live with it. His hands clenched into fists on the table, but he had nothing left to fight with. You'll regret this, he muttered. No, I said. You will. He stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. I hope you enjoy this power while it lasts, he said, because one day you'll look back and realize you're alone. I met his gaze, unblinking. Loneliness is better than betrayal, I said. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then, without another word, turned and walked out. And just like that, the war truly ended. That evening I sat in my office, the city spread before me. Everything had changed. The company was mine, the empire was solidified, and the people who had tried to take it from me were gone. I had built something no one could steal, not my ex-wife, not her father, not anyone. And now I wasn't just defending my power, I was expanding it. A knock on the door. Danielle entered, her expression unreadable. You did it. Of course I did. She nodded, then hesitated. So what now? I chuckled, leaning back in my chair. Now, I repeated. Now I make sure no one ever forgets who built this empire. She studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. I never doubted you. As she exited, I turned to the city. They had tried to erase me, they had tried to replace me, they had failed. Because Hastings Enterprises was no longer just a business, it was my legacy, and I would make sure no one ever took it from me again. Ladies and gentlemen, since you've listened to the end of this story, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which state you're watching from. Let's see what percentage of elite viewers make it to the end. And please kindly turn your attention to the screen after this message. There you'll find a full playlist of thrilling stories, a subscribe button for the channel, and our most captivating story. Click, enjoy, and thank you.